Welcome back, everyone, to our Pinedo Brothers podcast. I'm JP, and I got my brother.
Hey, everybody.
I am so happy to be chatting about some good news. I feel like it's been a little while, um, and so now that there's a little bit of good news, especially in the artist world, I said to Peter, we got to chat about this. So this past Halloween weekend, not this weekend before, but not this weekend that just passed, but the weekend before. Um, a film came out that was incredibly successful. It blew expectations out, making over $100 million. One of the most successful films of the year, and a year that overall the box office has been down. And it's called Five Nights at Freddy's. Now, this film was not directed by a Christian director, as far as I can tell. However, the franchise and the writer of the script is a pro life Christian. He's someone who's actually been canceled because it was revealed that he gave primarily to pro-life organizations um, and to Republicans. Horror of horrors. They revealed that they doxed him. He received threats, I hear, and people tried to cancel him a few years back. Well, it didn't work. His film, his very successful franchise, he started off as with a video game franchise, and then has now turned into this is the first film when I think there's going to be more by the fact that this is successful. And so, with these facts in hand, with these interesting facts, I thought, let's start analyzing this. Let's look a little bit deeper into this phenomenon. Let's analyze what the movie is all about. Like, let's take that as its own piece, and then study the phenomena as a whole. What do you think, Pete?
Mhm. Yeah, I like it.
Great. Okay. Well, let's start off with the artistic piece of the film itself. Peter, you just watched it. I watched it. What are your initial thoughts on it?
Well, I thought it was a very well-made movie for first off, it was entertaining, which is definitely nothing to be taken for granted in movies coming out these days. Um, it definitely there was no sense of the 2023 everything seems to need to have this message that it's trying to preach to you. That's just taking over the story. It just was just telling a story, straight up story with that was entertaining, and there was no ulterior motives in it. That being said, I do think I picked up on little things here and there that really kind of did give windows into, um, I guess the creator of the franchise is kind of just the way that he sees the world. Um, from an artistic like kind of staging standpoint, or like the way that the storytelling was given, I thought that the use of colors was very interesting. I don't know if that stood out to you, but that really stood out to me, the way that
What stood out in particular about the colors?
yeah, so there it everything that to do with children and childhood was very the colors really popped. It was like very bright, very um saturated colors. And then when it had to do with, I guess, the main character's kind of state of mind and all the other adults in his life, just kind of how he saw the world, everything was beige. It was very brown and kind of like the color had been sucked out of it. Um, which I thought it they continued kind of on that thread throughout the whole movie, and I thought that was a very effective way of kind of storytelling, of kind of telling the internal of the character through the actual sets. Um, and then when it came to the character of the only other adult who was colorful was the police lady, who ended up, being there to was kind of an ally to them. She was very bright blue. So I think that that was kind of one of the storytelling elements that really stood out to me, which I really enjoyed seeing that. Like other movies that I've watched, like Baby Driver, they use the same kind of color storytelling elements, which I really do like in a movie. So that was the first thing that stood out to me.
Yeah, I think the best example of this it was the flashback scenes that he would have. They weren't really
Mhm,
flashbacks; they were dreams, and he would
mhm,
remember his nuclear family. He would go back to that, like when his mom and his dad and his brother were together, and they're all having a good time together in the park. And when these flashbacks happened, or really dreams happened, as he was remembering through his dreams, the colors were vivid. They were striking.
mhm,
And there were sun flares. There was all that good stuff. So that seemed more real to him than real life. Those dreams. So yeah, I picked up on that as well. I didn't pick up on the fact that the cop was more vivid. The character of the cop was more vivid. Vanessa, I think her name was. And yeah, but that's a good one. It does. It is a movie that lends itself to more viewings. What did you think overall of the story?
mhm. Yeah, I think, the story, like I said, it really at very surface level, it's just a good, entertaining, story. But, you know, examining it a little bit closer and kind of looking at the themes in there, it does leave you with a very kind of haunting, I think, message. Like here, the main character is haunted, and his entire life has been destroyed by the fact that his little brother was kidnapped, and his innocence, his childhood, taken away by that. Both his brother and his uh, childhoods were taken away by that fact. And I think that you could kind of say that the message there is that it was about to take away their little sister's childhood, but he was able to kind of reverse course and be able to kind of save her childhood there. But I think that that kind of it's a very I thought that that is a really interesting message that because it's kind of the characters of the animatronics, which is a great touch, straight up Chuck E. Cheese. I, I'm, um,
Did
but these
you do you
characters,
have horror for Chuck E. Cheese as well?
I always kind of hated them. I mean, I never had nightmares about them, I don't think, but I remember always looking at those Chuck E. Cheese characters up on the stage and being like, "What? What?" I never thought they were funny or fun. I would just thought they were weird. So I was never horrified by them.
I never had that sort of reaction of horror that it seems like a lot of people had at these animatronics. Um, I used to love going to Chuck E. Cheese. I mean, we would go there all the time. Well, not all the time. Whenever someone had a birthday, it was like Chuck E. Cheese time, which was great. Um, but I never really sat down to watch the animatronic show. I was more like I'm sitting down to eat pizza, and then I'm looking forward to getting back to the games or the playground or whatever it was. So the animatronics didn't register in my mind too much, but it seems like for a lot of people, animatronics are a thing of horror,
Mhm,
um, which this Scott Cawthon really was able to latch on to.
mhm,
Um, and just harkening back to the story, what you were saying. So just to give the Cliff Notes version of the story, in case I'm assuming our listeners maybe aren't fans of this series, and in that case, this will be helpful. And if you are fans, well, I'll be fast. The It starts out, the movie does, not the video games are different, but it starts out there is a security guard getting murdered at this Five Nights at Freddy's place, this shut down pizza parlor, Chuck E. Cheese knockoff type of thing, and is murdered by this weird apparatus that's like gonna chop his face off, and you can't really see what's going on with it. It's a little saw esque, although it's not gory. You know, it cuts away before you can see anything. It's revealed later that he got chopped up. Um, and then it cuts to basically a near to well, some guy that is a security guard in a mall, and because of past trauma, which that is losing his brother is a little brother is abducted when this young man was a child. Um, and he feels responsible. So now he sees abductions happening all over. Um, and so because of that, he gets fired from his security guard job because he sees a father grab his son rather roughly, and he assumes that this father is actually an abductor. And so he attacks the father and starts punching him in front of his horrified child. So you get the sense this sort of thing has happened before, that he's prone to overreacting. He lives in a shack that's even in the shack he's behind on his rent. He's got his sister who won't talk to him, his little sister who won't talk to him, and his parents are not around, and it just seems like responsibility is crushing down on this young man, and he has no way of he doesn't have the ability to hold up against it. In desperation, he takes this job that is a terrible job, working nights at this same pizza parlor place, Freddy Fazbear's. And so uh, these little animatronic places, this knockoff Chuck E. Cheese's are all possessed, and they want to kill him. And it's about how he's going to survive these possessed animatronics through these 5 nights at Freddy's. And his little sister is drawn into the bargain because his little sister, the sitter, mysteriously vanishes. We won't say what happens, but he no longer has someone to watch his sister at night, so he has to bring the sister in, and so the sister comes into peril as well. And this is before he realizes that these things are possessed. So it's peril at all ends, and the character of the police officer comes in around, I think, a third of the way through, who seems a little odd because she's super interested in this place. Generally, police officers don't have that much time to be interested in this place, and yet she really likes it, and so it's odd. So she's got secrets, and those secrets were revealed at the end, which we won't give away. Um, on its face, the story is very compelling. The story is about a young man who's struggling with the guilt of his brother being abducted. And that's an interesting story beat that we're seeing in the culture a lot right now. The idea of a um, of stolen innocence. We talk about that in the Socrati, the film that we're working on, and um, you see that with Sound of Freedom. You see that with a lot of. I think people are thinking about this now. This innocence that must be protected, and that's a story beat that I see that kind of marks it very much as a work of art from a Christian. I'm not saying Christian art, but a Christian that made this work of art.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that's what the film is about. I actually don't think that's what the film is about. Um, I think, just to not to jump too far ahead, I don't want to manipulate a whole conversation, but I think the film is actually about responsibility. And there's a little bit of backstory that I have about that. The video game series, I haven't played it, and I do wish I had a chance to play it. I wanted to prior to this podcast, but um, kids got sick, so wasn't able to. But the second game, this is kind of based a little bit on the first game, I suppose. But the second game, the storyline, it's revealed that the um, the main villain behind it all becomes the main villain, and this is not in the film, so I'm not spoiling anything, and I'm going to go into the film at a later date. So you have no idea this is, but I'm spoiling a little bit of the game, um, but I don't think I'm spoiling all of the game. The main villain who's behind all of this evil going on, uh, I think William Afton is his name. He started off on his wrong path because he couldn't handle the fact that his his sons were playing together, and in them playing together, the older brother, who was a bit of a bully, went too far, and I think accidentally. I think you could also interpret it as this brother was psychopathic and purposely did it. Uh, Killed his younger brother. It's a sort of Cain and Abel sort of thing, very much harkening back to the story of Cain and Abel. And the father, the William Afton guy, couldn't handle it that his young son, the beloved young son, has died. And so he kind of loses his mind and he becomes very fixated on other young children and ruining their lives and ruining their innocence and killing them. And so he starts off this whole chain of pizza parlors to get access to this and push out his evil. Um, and the story of Cain and Abel is very much a story of responsibility, where you shirk the responsibility that of giving the proper sacrifice, and then once you're called out on not giving the proper sacrifice, you don't man up to it, but you say, well, this is not my fault. What do you want? Why are you why do you think my brother's sacrifice is better? So that pushing this guy out on his quest informs my reading. So that bad guy, which was created by Scott Cawthon, the creator of Five Nights at Freddy's, and then the bad guy is in this film, pushes my reading to say it's actually a story about the older brother taking responsibility, yes, that his younger brother was abducted, and that's partially his fault. But then also saying, however, my responsibility right now is to my younger sister, and I need to stop fixating on that failure and start thinking about my little sister. It's about putting things in their proper place responsibility wise, which really is a resonant message. And if you're on the fence about the fact that it's horror or not, I don't think, unless you think, see, I find the horror stuff the more demonic things. This is not a demonic story. So unless you're convinced that animatronics can be, possessed by non-demonic, by ghosts, by non-demonic characters, then I don't think you're going to find, unless you're in that camp, which I don't think many of our listeners are in that camp. I don't think you're going to find this truly horrific. I think it's very suspenseful. It's probably a little bit further past the level of horror than most Alfred Hitchcock is, but if you like Alfred Hitchcock and you find him enjoyable to watch, you'll probably enjoy this one as well. I think it's a good flick. That's kind of my review on it. It's not earth-shattering. The story itself is simple. Um, there's good moments and there's maybe not quite as resonant moments, but I like it. I think it does a good job overall as a film. So my review would be encouraging people to go watch it. Peter, that's a lot of words. I guess I would say, what do you think? Two questions, and turning it over to you. What do you think of my idea that that's what the film is about? And then, what is your review overall? Would you recommend this film?
Yeah, I think you're right about the aspect of it taking responsibility and how it's about being able to do that. I remember there's a certain point in the movie where the main character has, um, he it kind of goes up to this point where he's been saying all that's important to me, all that matters is trying to figure out what happened to my brother. That's all that matters to me. Um, and so that is what's making him waste away all of his life. He's spending half his life asleep because he's trying to go back to his dreams and memories and recall what happened. And then there's that point that kind of reaches the zenith of that, where he realized that that is, um, destroying everything around him, and that he, um, realizes he actually does have a responsibility to someone else. There's actually is someone else who's important to him, who needs him. Um, but I think, again, it kind of just it is still built around the idea of that lost innocence and that lost childhood, which I do think there is more and more stories that you're seeing in all different mediums kind of being told about that sense of something being lost and something being stolen. And I do think that's pretty indicative of the culture that we live in, that a
100%.
lot of people feel that.
I
And they're expressing it through music, through movies, TV shows, video games, even. That sense of something has been taken from us, and something that is, that sense of peace, that sense of belonging, which the main character felt with his family. Um, and that's ripped away. And so I think that that is something that we could definitely spend a lot of time kind of analyzing and seeing what other pieces of art kind of speak to that, because that is pretty big trend that we're seeing today. In terms of what I recommend it, yeah, absolutely. I think this would be a good um, movie to watch, especially if you're wanting to see something that's new and that's telling a, a story that just is not focused on, you know, throwing all these different agendas at you, and it's just trying to entertain you. I do think it does a good job at kind of building a lore, like you were saying. Like it's not very believable that and these animatronic machines can be possessed. You might say that, though. I think I could probably talk. I bet there's plenty of people out there who were horrified of these things when they were kids and could very easily believe that they have the souls of children inside of them that they ate. Um, yeah.
So
So
are you in that camp? Are you in that camp?
I don't know. I think I think it's a little bit more plausible than the way you make it sound. um,
Well, then you did you find it truly horrifying then? The film, like the film?
yeah, I did think that there was a good aspect of horror in there. I again, like I don't watch a lot of horror movies, so maybe my threshold for horror might be a little bit lower. But I do think it's definitely you would probably classify it more as a suspense thriller than horror. There is a little bit of that. There is a touch of goriness in it. I don't think they show it very much, but it's very constantly alluded to.
Mhm.
Um, and that gore, I think, does kind of up the ante when it comes to the horror aspect for someone,
Mhm.
for people who don't watch a lot of that. And that gore can be very impactful. Um, but again, like I think that's also a good thing to discuss there is that the use of the filmmakers, the way that they use the goriness is I thought it was used very cleverly because it's always at very impactful moments
Oh yeah.
that something violent happens.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a clumsy or bad filmmaker just throws blood at you constantly and it just loses all impact. But I
Yeah,
thought
they
that
show
the points
restraint,
of
which
violence
gives it
were very
strong
good.
strength. Yeah.
hmm hmm
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean I think that so that just does show like the maturity of the filmmaker, which I don't recall who the director is, but
Well, it was produced by Blumhouse, and that is not that's not a little guy. That's not a little guy. And Blumhouse is definitely not above doing woke stuff. They've done their share of woke movies that I won't even bother to mention because just they're run of the mill woke fest sort of things. Um, However, the whole Five Nights at Freddy's phenomenon is way more interesting than on the surface level, which is a bunch of possessed animatronics. I was so drawn in as I was researching this, and I was glad that I had a good reason to research it. Um, Again, assuming our listeners don't know about this phenomenon, forgive me if you already know this, but I think this is news for a lot of us. It was a created at a very low point in this in Scott Cawthon's life. Um, he was an animator, so he had worked on animating, like low budget animated films and things like that by training. And then but he wanted to make video games, and so he was making these sweeping epics. That's what he would call them, and trying to, like, he did a Pilgrim's Progress sort of video game where he was battles of good versus evil, and he was trying to speak about, he was trying to make something that was pretty overtly Christian as he was creating this stuff, and he was just failing left and right. And one of his latest failures was about a beaver, um, which the critics said that it looks like a animatronic almost. And so he's thinking about how he can possibly just his stated goal was make a little game that might earn him $40 a month. And this is really where the story of the little guy showing power, which is really a iconic American story. Um, the little guy, right, like rising up through the ranks just by the merits of his own pluck and hard work. He um, self-publishes this little video game again, hoping might make $40 a month, taking that negative comment that someone said it kind of looks like an animatronic, and he says, okay, well, let me try and make something that's scary, like that's almost in response to this criticism about animatronics. And he comes up with a game called Five Nights at Freddy's, which is similar. It's a security guard needing to survive a night where possessed animatronics are roaming around, and it's legitimately scary. People are just taken aback at this. He makes way more than $40 a month. He's making hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he makes more. He makes Five Nights at Freddy 2, Five Nights at Freddy 3. I think 7 games in total, making millions of dollars. Um, all just mostly himself. Like he voice acted almost all the characters there at the beginning. So it's this one man creating alone, and he completely captures a fan base. And he, as an artist, gets it. It's the idea of he keeps on saying, "I wanted to try to connect with others." He he didn't care so much about making a bunch of money as after he was able to support his family, but he wanted to try to connect to his audience, and then he felt obligated to try to keep on not letting his audience down. So if he released another game and then he heard someone say, well, this wasn't very good, he was like, okay, well, let me make another one and let me try and really make that work well. So Five Nights at Freddy's 3, they were saying it's not scary enough. The jump scares don't work. And so he's made another one to try to make the jump scares work. And they said, the story isn't quite right. So he made another one trying to build out the story. So it's constantly this inverse relationship, this artist not listening to, the dictates of some larger company, but listening to the dictates of his audience. It's very almost like a politician that's good at listening, you know? Um, the story of the idea of decentralized power really caught my eye because he wasn't sitting around waiting for some big production company to give him his big break. He was like, let me do this on my own and hopefully just make enough to support the family, because that $40 a month must have been a big deal for him at the time if he was going to work so hard to make it. Um, but he managed to do something far beyond that just by following, the dictates of his muse. So I found that fascinating. What do you make of that story, though?
Well, I think the first, thought that comes to me is that it's kind of how we always talk, that there's more than one way to uh, tell stories as a person as a faith person, a faith-based artist. Um, that it's not there's not just one formula, that all faith-filled artists have to follow, um, and that it's actually a really great thing to be able to go out and break the mold, to do something different and very unconventional, like this guy right here did. Um, I think the fact that he's listening to his audience, that's something that's really unusual for um, for creators. I think that you are there's usually two different types of creators, and that's the ones that are just the in line with the studio, who will just the yes man who will do whatever the studio wants to do, or the other very common one would be the one where he is like, yes, I'm the great artist, I know what's best, my audio, those plebeian audience, like the one who kind of looks down on the audience, which I think there's a lot of filmmakers and a lot of artists who look down on their artists, Scorsese, um, they, um, but I think that's really cool that he actually listens to what the people want, and he's trying to tell a story that will really connect with them, because that's really what art is really about. It's about communicating a piece of yourself that will connect with the audience, will connect with whoever encounters this art. Um, and so I think that's really wonderful. And I also think that's great that he's doing this in the form of a video game, because that's not something that you really typically think of being really refined art, but yet it's worthwhile art.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, a great critique. I do think in this case, this lone man working alone, it really does seem like, I mean, this lone artist working, chipping away at this small work. It's very much, it makes me think of Leaf by Niggle, Tolkien's Leaf by Niggle, where he's just focusing on this one little leaf.
Mm,
You can refine things quite a bit. I mean, it seems like he really managed to connect to such a degree that it's such a rabid fan base. So many people connecting with this story and just getting so excited. You listen. I've watched the response videos of people get so excited talking about this video game. And it strikes me as very refined in this particular regard. Just focusing on that world and giving your all to it, without worrying about messaging. Really, talking about larger things like childhood stolen innocence and responsibility, and Cain and Abel, and an angry, vengeful God in a way. When you're talking about this William Afton character, um, so his faith dictated a lot of what he did, and refined, I'm sure, a lot of what he did beyond what um, is even conscious by the artist. But it's exactly what we're talking about, is how he it's exactly what we talk about all the time, and that we wish to create in the culture, not in some isolated, from the church pews, but outside of the church pews and influencing everywhere. And this man, at first, it seemed like he was focusing on the church pews, and then he just said, well, let me just make something. And that's when, you know, everything clicked after that. And even now he looks back and he says that first game, it really is, it's perfect to me. He just, everything clicked for him in that one moment. So
mm,
good for him, and good for this story. And it's also a good sign of, I also think it's a great America story. Like, America, where else can you find a company like Steam where you can self-release your own little video game, and then push it out to the whole world to by a YouTube, like working with other gamers and dropping teasers so that people get interested and excited about it, and then all of a sudden you have a hit on your hands. Like, of course, it's lightning doesn't strike very often, but it wouldn't strike ever if it wasn't, the elements weren't conducive to this decentralized power. Like, this would never work in communist Russia, for example.
mm,
But America, something like this actually works. It happens, and it's happened once, and it can happen again. It's happened
yeah,
many times. It can happen again. So I
yeah.
really like it. Another point that I thought would be really interesting that I wanted to mention, and we'll close here pretty soon because I don't want to belabor the point too much. But he was talking about how he had been working for so many games on this. Just, well, the way he put it, there's human suffering. Only so much human suffering the mind can think about. And so he just was like, I gotta do something lighter. And that raised kind of interesting conundrum to me, thinking about this from an artist perspective. Is, suppose you did have something that was so successful that it took up your attention so entirely, and it was about human suffering and tragedy. Is there, how do you avoid, becoming, like, going mad with that? Or is there a danger to going mad? Am I do I like, when I think about that, I think about how, ooh, I'm not sure I'd want to live in there for that many years. But what's your take on that?
Hmm. And he was talking about the aspect of human suffering in the games that he was making.
he
Is
was
that right?
talking about how, yeah, focusing on all this human suffering about, because it's horror, it's horrific things that are happening, children dying and things like that. And he's
Mhm.
talking about that in his video games. It really took a toll on him
Mhm.
after, years of that.
Yeah. Well, I think that I can't imagine, like, that would be to kinda be in that, because his first game was 2014, right?
Yes.
Somewhere around there, and then he released around 7 or so of them. So he's, spending probably the better part of a decade in this universe that's built around these, possessed animatronics. So I think you could very easily go mad with that, especially if that's what's catapulting you into, to success.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know much about this, him and how he's doing right now, but if he hasn't gone mad, and if he has uh, kept his sanity and his faith and all of that, I think that's a great testament to his faith and to his relationship with God, because that's really the only thing that um, is able to kind of to keep you sane, and also um, to still seeing good in the world. And like I can understand, having worked in the pro life industry, and also and in the news industry now, you're dealing with horrifying, things every day. There's nothing more horrifying than abortion. Um, and then with the news, you're constantly seeing persecution and all these horrific things. And so that can very easily drive you mad. And I think that in one way or another, pretty much all industries kind of deal with some aspect of human suffering, either alleviating suffering or bringing attention to it and trying to help. Um, and so everyone kind of needs that that groundedness and rootedness in their faith, which, and that could kind of be an aspect of why we feel like something's been ripped away from us, because we do need that faith, and that's something that has been taken away in many ways in the culture today. So I think that's an interesting thought. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it actually makes me think that when you bring up abortion and you think of, like, I know you brought up a lot, but the one thing that I really fixated on when you brought up abortion, and then I connected that with how we're seeing this idea of lost innocence, stolen innocence. At first, I thought that concept was based upon our here in the West. We're a very optimistic people, and I'm wondering if our strength there is a bit spent, because optimism is energy ultimately, and that energy can be used to build amazing things. Point point in case in point, the United States and the incredible culture that we've created. And so I'm wondering, I thought initially this sort of lost innocence was kind of the death of the American dream, perhaps, that's been, because the child maybe is the American dream, and the fact that we're starting to lose our grip on that might be the child that is dying, or the child that's lost his innocence and it's been twisted and subverted. But now that when you bring up abortion, now I'm wondering if, on a deep level, the horror of abortion is starting to permeate into art more, and that's why because ultimately the child is sacrificed to a demon in abortion. It's a demonic sacrifice. So if we are speaking about this lost innocence, there's no more brutal reality of, or brutal instance of when a innocence is ripped away than when a child is ripped out of the womb and dismembered. Um, so I'm wondering if maybe the art that we're seeing now, that we're starting to pick up on, and obviously Five Nights at Freddy's is not about abortion on the surface, but maybe it's speaking to some deeper horror that you and I are trying to face point on in the Socrates. Um, Maybe all of these things kind of lead back to that same sort of just like slavery, we had to reckon with the fact that we kept people in bondage, people that were made in the image and likeness of God in bondage for decades. We have to come to this same reckoning eventually that we're sacrificing children to demons. And art has a good way of kind of clutching or reaching into the subconscious and speaking about things that we're not even sure, we don't even realize what they're talking about. Anyway,
Mm.
that's what comes to mind when you talk. And I know it's a little bit of it's tangential to your main point that you were making, but it comes to mind immediately.
Yeah. Well, I think you may be onto something there, that it's actually reaching farther in culture that we actually realize. Because the horror of something like abortion, I'm certain that it would have far-reaching consequences that, go much further um, than you can directly point to, you know. Um, and and I think that's just, yeah, that's a really, I think you might be onto something right there.
Mm.
Um, Ever since, abortion has been a major thing in the United States for 50 years now. Um, and it is demonic activity. And so I think, kind of coming back to our perspective as Catholic artists and filmmakers, um, that's probably going to influence a lot of what we do. Obviously, it's going to be influencing the Socrati, but the struggle against that, or dealing with that, and reckoning with that, is going to influence a lot of our art as well as others. Um, and of course, there's a lot of reason for hope, but there's a lot
Yeah,
of things that we do need to reckon with, and abortion is one of those things.
there's so many reasons for hope. Um, this story, Five Nights at Freddy, is a perfect example of reasons for hope. An artist that doesn't give up, that follows his faith, that uses whatever means at his disposal and finds an audience, connects with the audience. This, as artists, is a huge inspiration story to ourselves, but you can reach beyond being an artist to see that happen, for example, in the political world. In our day jobs, we focus quite a bit on that. And um, the fact that we are not a totalitarian government yet should not be ceded to either the right or the left. It's a fact. We're not there yet. We can still, the little guy still has a chance to do something. And by the way, there's many people that also agree with you, and you can make a difference in your community ultimately, just like Scott Cawthon made a difference to his community as a whole, which was his gamer community. We can make differences within our own communities writ large. Um, so that kind of brings me a little bit. Our whole podcast. I don't want. I know we're short on time, so real quickly, as way of a hot take, since this whole podcast was a review of art and the culture, which is what our hot take segment was supposed to be, I thought I'd maybe throw a curveball at you. What's your hot take on the bad news of the elections, at least from a pro-life perspective, that we've had this week?
Yeah. So yesterday was a rough election day for those who weren't following it too closely. The biggest one was the Ohio issue one, um, which basically, well, not basically, just it did insert abortion into the state constitution up through all 9 months of pregnancy. So you can have late term abortions all the way up to birth. And not only that, but also took away some safety measures for parents being able to be notified for, if their child decides to transition to, uh, the opposite gender and wants to get a surgery. Um, so here you have this bill that was passed overwhelmingly, 50, I think it was nearly 56% to 44% voted in favor of passing this thing, where that's both abortion up till birth, and child mutilation. Um, and I think the biggest takeaway for this for me was just that, to make a long story short, was that we are not speaking to the culture. We're not speaking to society. There is a huge disconnect between the reality of what these people are voting for and what they think they're voting for. And I think that just goes to show that Hollywood, Planned Parenthood, through Hollywood, through the media, through all these different mediums, TikTok, anything, all these things, um, they are speaking to them in a way that they're speaking to people in a way that they connect with and they understand, and that is what is losing us all these battles. You might think, oh, abortion is just going to be a losing battle for us from now on because of Roe v. Wade. That's not the case. Roe v. Wade, being overturned, uh, just kind of levels the playing field a bit. It's not a radical move, but we have an entire country convinced that the overturn of Roe v. Wade was radical. And so they needed to be passing all these radical abortion bills in order to kind of balance things again. But that is the opposite of the case. And so if we don't figure out how to speak to people in a way that's going to connect with them and understand, we're just going to continue having these losses, these massive losses. And it was not a close vote. Um, so that's kind of my, in a nutshell, quick take on that. We just need to communicate in a way that will be understood, and we're not doing that at the moment.
Yeah, I think just piggybacking on that, we were hit with an interesting conundrum. The the establishment left is very comfortable speaking about the culture. They don't like speaking about specifics, but they like speaking broadly about the culture. Reproductive rights, not mentioning that up to, birth, you can tear apart a child in the womb, is what they call reproductive rights. That's incredibly radical. But if we don't call it out, then it can get slipped in there past, and the left is very comfortable having that slipped in there. And the right is not nearly as comfortable speaking. The establishment right would prefer to speak more about, lowering taxes and, um, you know, education choice and things like that, which I am all for. 100%. Texas is pushing for education choice right now, and I am doing everything I can to help with that. However, if we're not comfortable speaking about the culture, and the other side is, guess what side's going to win on the culture? It's just a very simple calculus there. So that's a problem, and you see that now quite a bit. Obviously, the messaging overall needs to be overhauled on this. Like you were saying, very reasonable laws pushed by pro-life advocates are somehow cast as, you know, radical laws, while the most radical thing that has passed in recent memory just gets passed by a landslide underneath the guise of being reasonable. So that is just a complete messaging disaster. But it's a real call for people to speak in the culture. And I think people like and like what they're doing in the Daily Wire is great. I think that's wonderful. Um, but I also think this Five Nights at Freddy's example goes to show the power of an individual to really speak, like find a community and speak to that community and make a huge difference in it. Um, so I think we need to be cognizant of that. It convinces me we need to keep pushing with what we can with the Socrati. Things are going slower than we would like, but um, there has to be a way to speak to the culture because there is a vacuum right now. Um, I can't put my finger exactly how we can fill that vacuum beyond keep pushing what we're doing, making our films, but there needs to be something. So, but your hot take I couldn't put better myself. Agreed.
Yeah, and that's what we're all about. The Pinedo Brothers is actually speaking to the culture, um, not here with not trying to sermonize and preach them, We're actually trying to connect, like this guy with Five Nights at Freddy, connecting with them, telling a story, um, and through that story, imbuing those values and that is grounded in truth and beauty. Um, and that is it takes courage. I'm not saying, it's not just on our part, but on anyone's part, being able to have the fortitude and courage to actually say no. That actually is that is radical. Killing a baby up until 9 months. I know you think that it's a matter of reproductive rights to be able to quote unquote end a pregnancy. I think it's going to take us actually becoming comfortable with saying, "Oh, so you're talking about murder, or you're talking about killing a baby." That's what that is, right? We have this polite mentality of like, "Oh, we can't, say things like that," but we have to have the courage to be able to do it because
Well, we
it's
definitely need
losing
the
a
courage to
battle.
do it. But my instinct is a lot of the times we don't necessarily have to say that. I mean, if there's a radical advocate like that that's pushing for up to birth, but a lot of times people are going to agree. Like by polling numbers, we agree past a certain date in abortion. We need to we need to like say, okay, this is something that I'm not comfortable with. So anyway, I think that kind of closes it up here. Shall we go ahead and jump off the podcast?
Yeah. No, I
Okay.
think thanks for suggesting this movie. I think I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to researching this guy more because it's always great to see
Yeah.
other Christians being able to tell stories like this. So
100% agree. I look forward to what Scott does next. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining us here. We'll talk to you all later.